So, welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is episode 2 of our double feature masterclass on the architecture of meaning. And I want to start with a question for you, the listener. Have you ever wondered why a conversation with a family member or maybe a colleague can just suddenly feel like you're standing on two completely different planets?
Right. Yeah. And it's not necessarily because they're just being stubborn.
Exactly. It's actually because the machinery they use to process reality is running on entirely different code.
And the wild thing is, neither of you can even see the code. You both just see what you consider to be the obvious truth.
Yeah, which is so frustrating.
Uh-huh.
Because, usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, there's this expectation of precision. Like if you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Right. It's binary. Broken or not broken.
Exactly. It's comforting. We really like things to be visible and easily categorized. But then you step into the world of human cognition, into how we actually perceive and react to our reality. And suddenly that x-ray machine is just useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of muddy waters. I mean, because the machine we are using to examine the problem is the problem itself. Our perception is literally trying to diagnose our own perception.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are looking under the hood of your mind's operating system.
Yes.
We're exploring how our minds construct reality before we even consciously act. And more importantly, how you can actually take the steering wheel back. So we are diving deep into the second half of interpretation as action and the entirety of inherited maps and the illusion of obviousness.
And we're going to decode it all using the 4 parameters framework, the 4DP, and this really fascinating concept called linear reality deduction.
Right, which, despite sounding like advanced physics, is actually an incredibly practical set of tools.
Oh, totally. Because what we're really unpacking today is the fundamental difference between living as an unconscious inhabitant of a map you didn't draw versus becoming the conscious architect of your own meaning.
Okay, let's unpack this, and let's start with the staging ground of everything we do, which is how we interpret the world. Because the core premise here is that interpretation isn't just a decorative preface to action, it actually is action in seed form.
Yeah, and that is a crucial shift in perspective. People often speak as if reading a situation were one isolated thing and then, doing something about it were another entirely.
Right.
We imagine that our minds can just quietly produce meanings with no material consequence until the exact moment an arm lifts, or a policy is signed, or a sentence is spoken aloud. But the text explicitly refuses this comforting fiction.
It does.
Interpretation is action in seed form. It is action in routing form.
Okay, let me pause you there, because that's a pretty big claim. How is my silent thought about a situation in action? Like if I'm sitting on a park bench and I interpret the weather as gloomy, I haven't really done anything, right?
Well, you haven't taken a macro-physical action, no, but you've initiated a micro-cascade.
A micro-cascade?
Yeah, the text argues that interpretation governs pace, patience, suspicion, trust, refusal, escalation, all of it. Before a muscle even twitches, your interpretation has already arranged the field of possibilities.
Oh, wow.
So if you interpret the sky as gloomy, your body might subconsciously brace. Your energy levels might dip. Your threshold for irritation might lower. Long before the world sees a consequence, the architecture of consequence has already begun to rise.
That actually reminds me of a smartphone's autocorrect.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Your brain is automatically filling in the blanks based on its prior training data, like the words you type most often, the phrases you use.
Yeah.
But it presents the result to you as if it's the objective truth right there on the screen.
Exactly.
And sometimes you hit send before you even realize the autocorrect completely changed the meaning of your message. Your brain is doing that with reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's taking in raw sensory data and autocorrecting it into a narrative, but it hides the squiggly red line.
That is a highly accurate analogy. And that disguise, the hiding of the squiggly red line, is the actual source of its power. The mind prefers not to experience its own readings as constructed.
It wants to think it's just seeing reality.
Right. It prefers to experience them as pure reality. Why? Because construction requires scrutiny. If I admit I am constructing an interpretation of you, I have to justify my blueprints.
Right, you have to defend your work.
Exactly. But reality just demands a response. If my brain presents you as an objective threat, my next move like defensiveness or aggression or avoidance feels entirely justified before it is even examined.
I see. So a person doesn't usually say to themselves, oh, I am interpreting this stranger as threatening according to certain inherited cultural cues. They just think, This person is a threat.
Precisely. They just feel the threat.
So what does this look like when we turn it inward? Because the text goes deep into self-interpretation, where the reader and the thing being read are occupying the exact same body.
Yeah, the example of failing at a task illustrates this perfectly. Let's say you attempt to learn a new software program for work, and you completely mess it up.
Okay, pretty common scenario.
Right. The outward event is identical in all timelines. You attempted something, and the result was an error. But what happens next, your actual future, depends entirely on the interpretive frame that claims the event.
So give me the split paths here. What happens if I autocorrect that failure into, say, a personal flaw?
If the failure is interpreted as proof of stupidity or incompetence, future effort contracts. The brain basically says, why expend energy on something we are inherently bad at?
Makes sense. It's a defense mechanism.
Exactly. If it's interpreted as humiliation, your attention shifts away from problem solving and entirely towards self-protection and hiding the failure. But if the exact same event is interpreted merely as data-like, this specific sequence of clicks does not produce the desired outcome. Experimentation continues.
The event itself is completely neutral until the architecture of meaning gets hold of it. But here is my struggle with that. How do I know if it's just data or if I actually am just bad at it?
That's the trap, right?
Yeah, aren't we in danger of toxic positivity here? Like, oh, it's not a failure, it's just data, when maybe I really shouldn't be using the software at all.
Well, that's a fair distinction to draw, but the text isn't advocating for delusion. It's pointing out that I am bad at this is a fixed terminal interpretation. It stops motion.
Right, it's a dead end.
Exactly. Whereas this is data is a fluid, functional interpretation. It allows you to gather enough information to eventually say, you know what, this software requires an investment of time I cannot make, which is a strategic choice rather than a collapse of self-worth. The hinge is how the interpretation organizes your next move.
And this creates a recursive loop, doesn't it? Like, the interpretation manufactures the evidence it appears to discover.
Oh, absolutely. The recursive world building. Let's scale it up to an institution because it's easier to see. Consider a bureaucracy, perhaps a municipal government or, say, a school administration.
Okay.
If that bureaucracy reads a certain population or a specific neighborhood as inherently suspicious or problematic, it alters its behavior based on that seed. It increases surveillance.
It deploys more monitors, more audits, more police presence.
Right, because it believes it is responding to a reality.
Yeah, it thinks it's just being responsible.
Exactly. But what is the mechanical result of increased surveillance? It naturally produces more recorded incidents, simply because more eyes are watching for infractions. The threshold for what gets documented drops.
Right. And those newly recorded incidents are then fed back into the system's database.
Yes. And then the bureaucracy looks at the database and says, see, we were right to be suspicious. Look at all these incidents.
Wow. So the interpretation becomes infrastructure. And that infrastructure manufactures the exact evidence it needs to feed itself. The loop completely closes.
It does. The interpretation feels like an absolute, undeniable reality, when in fact, the system merely harvested exactly what it planted.
That is both fascinating and, honestly, kind of terrifying. Because if our autocorrect is changing the text of our reality, and then using that changed text to justify its next correction, how do we ever break out of it?
It's hard.
How do we turn it off and see the raw code? I think this is where the text introduces linear reality deduction and the meteor test, right?
Yes, the meteor test is a profound mechanism for clearing illusion. It forces you to separate the symbolic layer of reality from the operational layer. It asks a very simple, brutal question. Where does the abstraction end, and where does the physical machinery begin?
Okay, walk me through how to actually apply this. Let's use the text's example of the economy, because, we talk about the economy like it's a Greek god. We say things like, the economy is angry today, or the market is anxious.
Yeah, we grant it this weather-like grandeur. But if you apply the meteor test, if you ask what would actually be physically impacted if a meteor struck, suddenly the grandeur just peels away.
Because an abstraction cannot be hit by a meteor.
Exactly. So what is the economy when we strip away the poetry? It resolves into actual contracts sitting in file cabinets, physical labor extraction, supply chains moving tomatoes on highways, property law, land use, energy grids, advertising algorithms.
Even money gets stripped down, doesn't it? The text points out that money resolves into physical tokens, server farms, ledgers, threats of state violence, permissions, and accounting procedures.
Yes, it's just a set of routines. It only remains effective because millions of people wake up every day and repeatedly embody those routines.
And this isn't just an exercise in pedantry, is it?
Not at all. The text emphasizes that this deduction is deeply emancipatory. Once an abstraction is stripped of its false divinity, the machinery becomes visible.
And you cannot negotiate with a god.
Exactly. You cannot redesign a weather system,
Yep.
but machinery. Machinery can be dismantled, reassembled, and redesigned. The map is not the terrain. Reverence is not force.
You cannot negotiate with a god, but machinery can be redesigned. That fundamentally shifts how you approach a problem.
It changes everything.
Like if I'm stressed about my career, which is this huge, terrifying abstraction, I can apply the meteor test. What actually is my career? It's a series of emails, a desk, 3 specific recurring meetings, a set of skills, and a direct deposit.
Right. And you can fix an email chain. You can change a meeting. You can't fix a career.
That is a perfect, localized application of linear reality deduction. It breaks the recursive loop of anxiety by grounding you in operational reality.
Exactly.
But that leads us to the next massive question. If interpretation is the machinery, and we're just running these programs, who wrote the code in the first place?
Now we get to the deep stuff.
Yeah, this brings us to the concept of inherited maps and the illusion of obviousness.
Which might be the most challenging claim in the text. It posits that much of what people experience as self-evident truth, as obvious, bedrock common sense, is not self-evident at all.
It's just inheritance that has become ambient.
Yes, it is an arrangement of attention handed down so thoroughly and so early in life that it no longer feels arranged.
It's the water we swim in. The text talks about how these maps arrived earlier than our own memories. They were in the emotional weather of our household, in the quiet choreography of who was trusted and who was watched.
Right, in what the schoolroom emphasized and what it ignored. We inherited ideas of what is normal, what kinds of people require explanation, and what kinds of people get to stand unexamined at the center of the frame.
And because these maps arrive before we possess the critical faculties to evaluate them, and because they are reinforced repeatedly without announcing themselves as maps, they solidify into reality itself.
The feeling of obviousness is one of the most efficient disguises falsehood has ever worn. I mean, you are rarely trapped by ideas you know are contestable. You can debate a philosophy. You are trapped by the ideas that feel beneath contest.
But here's where I get stuck. If these maps are just inherited, if they are just old code installed by our parents and our culture, why do we defend them with such visceral intensity?
That's a great question.
Like, think about the last time you argued with someone over a political stance or a family narrative. Their heart rate spikes, they get defensive, they might even yell. Why does a challenge to an idea feel like a physical threat?
Because you aren't just challenging an idea, you are threatening their orientation. The text defines this as effective defense.
Effective defense.
Right. We defend bad maps because they have become conditions of our belonging. A framework that has oriented a person or a family for decades does not remain a cold, abstract instrument. It becomes deeply intimate. It organizes emotional traffic.
Let's ground this. The text talks about family systems, specifically the dynamic of the responsible sibling versus the difficult sibling.
It's a classic example. A family might preserve the label of the difficult child long into adulthood, long after living evidence has complicated or directly contradicted those assignments.
But wait, pushing back here just a bit. What if the difficult child actually is just difficult? What if they're constantly causing drama? Isn't the map just accurate?
Well, the map might contain historical accuracy, but the issue is how the map organizes current reality to ensure the child remains difficult.
Oh, I see.
The label does relational work for the whole family. It distributes identity. It tells everyone who receives sympathy, who receives blame, and who carries the expectations.
Right.
If the family were to acknowledge that the difficult child is actually just highly perceptive and reacting to underlying family dysfunction, what happens?
Well, the whole family system has to reorganize. The responsible sibling might have to admit they are actually just compliant and enabling. The parents might have to look at their own marriage.
Exactly. Acknowledging reality would force a massive, painful restructuring of emotional traffic. And systems naturally resist reorganization. Organisms defend orientation before they defend truth.
Wait, say that again?
Organisms defend orientation before they defend truth. Losing that map, even if the map is toxic, means losing their footing in reality.
That completely changes everything about how we communicate. When someone is refusing to see what you consider to be obvious facts, they aren't necessarily being stupid or maliciously stubborn. To them, accepting your facts means stepping into a void where they don't know who they are anymore.
That is the exact empathy required to understand inherited maps. We constantly confuse having lived within a framework for a long time with having rationally arrived at it.
The text refers to this as duration masquerading as proof.
Right. A person says, that's just how the world is, but what they actually mean is, that is how the world was first arranged for me, and I have moved within that arrangement for so long that it now feels prior to thought.
Let's run through the obviousness test from the text to really highlight this, because two people can witness the exact same event and experience radically different levels of obviousness.
Right. One person looks at a strict classroom and sees necessary discipline. Another person looks at the exact same room and sees humiliation.
One sees professionalism in a dress code. Another sees a culturally narrow performance standard designed to exclude.
One hears proper language. Another hears power protecting its preferred dialect of legitimacy.
One hears just a joke. Another hears a map doing maintenance on a social hierarchy.
And neither person feels like they are consulting a map. Both feel they are responding to what is plainly, objectively there.
So if reality keeps pressing against these inherited maps, how do they survive? We all experience contradictions to our beliefs. How does the mind deflect that data?
Inherited obviousness survives because it has developed sophisticated techniques for metabolizing resistance. It absorbs contradiction without surrendering the larger map.
How?
It does this by reclassifying the disconfirming evidence. We call the contradictory data an exception, or highly emotional, or context-specific.
Oh, I see it now. Like, he's different. Those are the good ones. That neighborhood has changed. It's an anomaly.
Yes. By converting the challenge into an anomaly, the inheritance is protected. The map remains intact because the threat was categorized as a fluke, rather than evidence that the map itself requires a redesign.
Okay, so we've mapped the problem. We see the autocorrect loop. We recognize the inherited maps, the illusion of obviousness, and how fiercely we defend our orientation. How do we actually fix it?
This is where we get to the tools.
Right. How do we stop bowing to the tremor of obviousness and actually redesign our operating system?
This is where the text pivots from diagnosis to method. It introduces the 40P framework, the four-dimensional pillars: target, truth, totally, and title.
Target, truth, totally, title.
These are the non-negotiable architectural ground rules for real change.
The text says if you remove one, the whole structure collapses. Let's break these down, starting with what it calls the bedrock: truth.
Truth is the pillar of radical self-honesty. The text calls it epistemological integrity. It is about separating the surface self, the everyday personality that reacts, judges, defends, and narrates, from the deeper core witness.
Whoa, stop right there. Epistemological integrity. I mean, that sounds great in a philosophy seminar, but say that in plain English. How do I actually do that on a Tuesday morning when I'm just stressed out?
Fair enough. It means knowing how you know what you know and refusing to lie to yourself about your own motives.
Easier said than done.
Truly. The surface self employs incredibly sophisticated tools of self-deception to maintain coherence: rationalization, projection, denial. Epistemological integrity is catching yourself in the act of making an excuse and calmly identifying it as an excuse.
But our brains are literally evolved to protect us from discomfort through those exact mechanisms. How do we bypass our own evolutionary wiring when our minds are lying to us to keep us feeling safe?
The text suggests applying the wise parent test. Think of a wise, deeply loving parent listening to a child who is faking a stomachache to skip school.
Okay, yeah.
The parent doesn't scream at the child and call them a liar, but they also don't buy the lie. They sit on the edge of the bed and gently interrogate the evasion. Are you really sick, or are you terrified about the math test today?
Oh, I love that. You don't shame yourself. You just refuse to be fooled by yourself.
Exactly.
You asked, am I really too busy to exercise today, or am I prioritizing comfort? Am I really just not a math person, or is that a story I've been telling myself since the 4th grade to avoid the vulnerability of trying and failing?
Yes. Truth demands that the what, why, who, where, when, and how of whatever is happening must be respected for what it actually is. Not what you wish it to be, not what you fear it to be, and not what you pretend it to be.
Right.
Without truth, the other three pillars are built on quicksand. You cannot set a meaningful target if you lie about the coordinates of where you are starting from.
Which perfectly transitions us to pillar number 2, target. Target is all about aim and direction. But there's a massive distinction made here between a goal and a target. The text heavily favors flexible targets over rigid plans. Why is that?
Consider the analogy of an archer. Target demands directional clarity, but it requires tactical fluidity. The target is clear, it is visible on the horizon, but the actual path the arrow takes depends on the wind, the humidity, the distance, the strength of the archer's pull.
Right, there are variables.
A rigid plan, a goal, says the arrow must travel exactly 47 degrees northeast at 120 feet per second. A flexible target says hit the center and adjust your angle and tension as the wind demands.
Because a rigid plan shatters the moment unexpected reality hits.
Exactly.
A hurricane doesn't care about your beautifully crafted itinerary. A macroeconomic shift doesn't respect your 5-year career plan. If your only response to a changing environment is to cling harder to a broken plan, you'll just break right along with it.
The text makes a beautiful 3-part distinction here. Purpose, target, and goals. Purpose is the deepest why. It's an infinite direction, like I am here to facilitate understanding.
Okay.
Goals are specific, finite, and disposable destinations, like I will write this specific book by December. But target is the magnetic pull between them. It is the pillar of strategic flexibility. It ensures that even when a goal fails, the target remains intact, keeping your actions consonant with your purpose.
So we have truth, knowing exactly where we are with radical honesty, using the why as parent test. We have target, knowing the direction we are pulling toward, adjusting for the wind. But the text argues that you can have perfect truth and a crystal clear target, and you still won't move an inch without the next 2 parameters.
No, you won't.
Let's unpack the third one.
Totally is the pillar of what the text calls dimensional homonymy.
Okay, you've got to stop with these terms. Dimensional homonymy sounds like a plot device in a sci-fi movie. Unpack that for me.
Think of a homonym words that sound the same but have different meanings. Dimensional homonymy is about recognizing the layered complexity of a single choice. It's about completeness.
Okay.
Are you actually fully committed to the entirety of what you've chosen? Or are you keeping a psychological escape route open? Are you all in or are you hedging?
It's like looking at a smartphone. If you just call it a phone, you miss the camera, the GPS, the internet browser, you collapse the dimensions. Totally is about seeing the complete picture of your commitment.
Yes, and to test this, the text provides the totally protocol. It's a method for closing escapes. First, you name the choice clearly. Second, you rigorously identify the hedge, the backup plan, the if this gets too hard, I can always just quit and do X safety net.
Well, that's confronting.
Very. And third, you close the route. You take a material action that makes the old safe path unavailable. Because, as the text states, when you are not totally in, you are practicing. When you are totally in, you are becoming.
When you are not totally in, you are practicing. That is a gut punch.
Yeah.
So how does the 4th pillar, title, bring this all together?
Title is the handler of handlers. It is the story you are living inside. It is the identity you've named yourself into, and it shapes the other 3 pillars quietly from the bottom up.
Wow.
The danger is that we almost always operate under inherited titles.
Like the family example earlier, I'm the dependable one who stays and suffers quietly. I'm the difficult child, or broader ones, right? Like, I'm just an anxious person. I'm bad with money.
Exactly. To break out of inherited titles, the text introduces the concept of nounships. A nounship is the conscious recognition that most labels we use are temporary states of being, not fixed, immutable identities.
I like that.
You aren't permanently an anxious person. You are simply a person occupying an anxious state temporarily.
Okay, I love the theory of this, but how do I actually use a nounship? Let's say I'm about to walk into a networking party, and my inherited title, the one screaming in my head, is, I am socially awkward. How exactly do I use a nounship to dismantle that in the doorway before I walk in?
You step back and apply the grammar of fluid identity. In the doorway, you don't fight the feeling. You reframe the label. You say, I am currently experiencing social apprehension, which makes sense given this environment.
So you detach the emotion from your identity.
Exactly. You detach your core self from the noun. Awkward is not what you are. Apprehension is weather that is passing through you. Nounships separate the essence of a thing from its transient roles. If you lock yourself into the title, I am socially awkward, you will unconsciously sabotage interactions to ensure the title remains accurate. You cage yourself.
Because if I successfully make a friend, it threatens my orientation.
Precisely. Title demands naming with release. You must use words and name things to navigate the world, but you must hold those names lightly. And this brings us to the rule of 3, the interdependence of the 4DP. The text presents this somewhat dizzying, recursive linguistic loop. If the title is totally the truth of the target, then the total is the target of the title's truth, and the target is titled as a truth in total.
It sounds like an esoteric tongue twister.
Yeah.
What is the practical takeaway of that loop?
It means the framework is holographic. Each pillar requires all the others to function. You cannot have truth without seeing. Totally. If you acknowledge your anger, but not the fear underneath it, you are being selectively honest, not totally honest.
Oh, I see.
You cannot set a target without truth. A GPS can only give you directions if it knows your actual current location. You cannot hold titles lightly without truth, and you cannot commit totally without a clear target. They interlock. If one falls, they all fall.
All right, so we've mapped the foundation. We understand how interpretation builds our world. We've decoded how inherited maps disguise themselves as obvious, and we have the four ground rules: target, truth, totally, title. But now, this deep dive takes a massive pivot. We are moving from the philosophy and psychology of meaning into the actual rigorous mathematics of it. We are entering part 3 of the text, metamatics.
This is the critical transition from being an unconscious inhabitant of a map to a conscious architect. Metamatics is a pseudo-algebraic concept mapping system. It's a formal language for mapping relationships, transformation, and possibility.
I have to admit, when I first saw math equations in a text about human meaning and purpose, my brain kind of short-circuited. I thought, wait, am I seriously supposed to do algebra to figure out why I feel stuck in my career?
It's a jarring shift for many readers, but the text clarifies its utility beautifully. It is pseudo-algebraic. It doesn't use numbers.
Okay.
It uses the structural logic of algebra variables, operators, equations to map concepts. It forces you to see the architecture of relationships rather than just floating in a cloud of vague feelings.
So let's break down the core formula the text provides. A, B, A, S, C, D. What exactly are we looking at here?
Let's take it piece by piece, because once you see the machinery, it's incredibly intuitive. A and C are what the text calls iterators. Think of an iterator as your internal fuel or content.
Okay.
It's what you, the individual, are bringing to the table. It maps to your personalisms, your curiosity, your skill, your energy, your commitment.
Okay. So iterators are my internal stuff.
Yeah.
What about B and D?
B and D are delineators. These represent the external context, the inherited map, the environment you find yourself in. They are the environmentistics. The support available to you, the opportunity in your industry, the daily structure of your life.
And the operators, like the math symbols connecting them.
The slash symbol does not mean division. It means featured by, shaped by, or expressed through. So AB means your internal iterator A is filtered by your external delineator B.
Let's use the real-world example from the text to make this concrete. The formula is curiosity, support, time engageability. Walk me through applying this. Let's say I'm trying to learn the piano, and I am incredibly frustrated and on the verge of quitting.
Perfect scenario. Let's map it. Curiosity support means your internal curiosity, your desire to learn the piano, is filtered by the support available to you.
Right.
Do you have a good teacher? Are you using a terrible YouTube tutorial? Are your family members complaining about the noise?
Okay. And the second half, time engageability.
That means your time, how many hours you have after work, is filtered by engageability, which is how inviting or accessible the learning process is. Is your piano out of tune? Is the sheet music too advanced?
Got it.
And then we have the ear symbol, the plus sign inside a circle. This means integrated with. It shows that these two filtered relationships are working together to create your total unified system. The entire equation maps your current reality with the piano.
This is a revelation. Because normally, if I'm failing at learning the piano, I just blame myself. I use an inherited map and a toxic title, say I lack discipline, or I'm just not musical. I attack my iterators.
Yeah.
But if I map it algebraically, I can pinpoint the actual breakdown.
Exactly. Is your curiosity high, but your support practically zero? If so, your curiosity goes nowhere because it is starting for guidance. Is your time abundant, but the engageability of the material terrible?
Then your time is wasted fighting unnecessary friction.
Right. The problem isn't you. The problem is the relationship between what you bring and what the environment offers.
It completely removes the shame. You have diagnostic power now. You don't need to change your soul. You might just need to change the delineator. You need a better teacher or an easier song.
Yes. And the text gives another profound example. Skill opportunity, energy environment. Think about feeling stuck at work. Is your skill high, but your opportunity capped? Are you underutilized?
Great.
Is your energy great, but the environment is a toxic corporate culture draining you? You can see exactly which variable needs to shift.
And if we scale this mathematical mapping up to your entire life architecture, a text describes the ultimate goal as moving from a state of R1V to AV1.
Yes, that's the big shift.
Let's unpack those acronyms, because this is the crux of taking the steering wheel back. R1V versus AV1. What is the mechanism of shifting between them?
R1V stands for Responsive Variable 1. The text argues that most people live their entire lives in this state. In R1V, you are the variable adjusting to external demands. You are waiting to be chosen.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. You define your success through external validation. You are constantly adjusting yourself to fit the inherited maps of your culture, your family, your workplace. You are reacting.
It's living on autopilot. The environment dictates reality, and you just contort yourself to survive it.
Conversely, applying the 40P in mathematics allows you to shift to AV1 Autonomous Variable 1. In AV1, you hold the position of 1. You are anchored in your internally defined principles, your truth, and your target.
So you aren't waiting to be chosen anymore.
Exactly. External conditions do not define you. They simply become variables you factor in and work with.
So in a career context, R1V is desperately adjusting to external expectations, hoping a boss notices you and chooses you for a promotion. AV1 is defining the value you want to create, your target, and creating opportunities where success equals your own alignment and contribution.
Right. If the current job doesn't fit the formula, you don't change your truth, you change the job.
Exactly. Or in health. R1V is punishing yourself with a diet because you hate your body and want external validation based on cultural maps. AV1 is honoring your body's capacity because your internally defined target is embodied aliveness. It is a complete inversion of power dynamics.
It really is.
To bring this all home, the text provides a massive final deduction. It illustrates what happens when a map refuses to accept reality, when an ideology refuses to engage with variables outside its own inherited blueprint.
Yes.
It analyzes this strategic failure of supremacy using World War II as a case study. And to be clear to our listener, the text is using this purely to analyze the mapping strategy, looking at why certain rigid maps ultimately fail.
And from a purely strategic operational standpoint, the text outlines 3 key distortions in that historical mapping that guaranteed its collapse. First, the myth of divine infallibility.
Right.
This is a self-image so grandiose that it interprets logistical setbacks as mere tests of faith rather than vital data. This leads to disastrous operational decisions, like launching invasions across vast distances in winter against all meteorological and logistical advice.
Because the inherited map said, we are invincible, and they refused to apply the meteor test to the actual terrain.
Precisely. Second, the fiction of enemy inferiority. Supremacy requires believing adversaries are inherently weak or subhuman. This completely skewed their understanding of actual strengths and capabilities.
Yeah, that's a fatal flaw.
It blinded them to the immense industrial capacity of their opponents, and it led them to persecute brilliant minds within their own borders, depriving themselves of crucial scientific and strategic talent.
They threw away their own iterators because their delineators were poisoned by ideology.
Beautifully put. And third, the illusion of unilateral control. The belief that personal will alone can dominate reality, rejecting what the text calls empathetic research.
Let's define that, because empathy sounds soft, but the text uses it tactically here.
In this context, empathy does not mean sympathy or moral agreement. It means cognitive accuracy. It means recognizing the humanity, creativity, and resilience of an adversary so you can accurately predict their behavior.
Right.
True strategy requires the humility to accept that reality exists outside of your inherited blueprint.
The ultimate paradox the text presents is that successful strategy requires understanding and respecting the strengths of others. But doing so shatters the ideological foundation of supremacy. Supremacy wages war against the fabric of reality itself.
It does.
It refuses to learn, adapt, or see others accurately. It's the ultimate example of a bad map destroying the people using it. If your map denies reality, reality will eventually crush the map.
And that scales all the way back down to the micro level of our daily lives. If our personal inherited maps deny our true nature or deny the reality of the people around us, we will crash. We have to debug our own minds.
We really do.
Which brings us back to the recursive self, the metamind, the capacity to observe your own architecture in real time, apply the 40P, use metamatics to map the terrain, and continuously refine your position. You are not just the actor on the stage, you are the director, and you are the audience.
What a journey this deep dive has been. We started by recognizing that our interpretations are not passive observations. Like an autocorrect silently changing our text, interpretation is the staging ground of action.
We then explored how the obvious truths we live by are often just inherited maps, ambient pathways we defend emotionally because they provide us with orientation and a sense of belonging, even when they are toxic.
And then we introduced the antidote, the 40P framework: target, truth, totally, title. The non-negotiable architectural pillars of transformation, applying radical honesty, flexible aiming, dimensional commitment, and fluid identity through nounships.
And finally, we decoded the algebra of meaning through metamatics. We learned how to use ABECD to diagnose the relationship between our internal iterators and our external delineators.
Allowing us to shift from a reactive, waiting to be chosen R1V life to an autonomous, self-directed AV1 life. This isn't just theory. This is about becoming the administrator of your own mind, upgrading from a legacy operating system full of glitches and inherited biases to one you coded yourself, line by line.
I want to leave everyone with a final reflection derived from the text, a practical application for tomorrow morning. Before you act, before you step out the door, pause and ask yourself, what is the title of the chapter I am living today?
Oh, that's good.
Is it a title I inherited from someone else's expectations, or is it a title I am consciously choosing right now? And what new reality would unfold if you simply decided to change the title?
Remember that X-ray from the beginning. The mind isn't a clean, binary snapshot of a broken bone. It's complex, it's murky, and it's constantly autocorrecting your reality. But now, you have the math to see the code. You have the tools to clear the muddy waters. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of your own meaning. We'll see you next time.